Good evening. Hello, hello. Welcome to Book Passage, another Book Passage online event. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. Thank you for joining us. We always appreciate your support for the events, for our authors, for the books. We really do appreciate it and your time, whether you're here with us live or later in the archived events. We're going to do this event a little different than we've done typically, since we've been doing the virtual events. We're kind of going back to how we would do things in person, where the author will give a nice presentation with a reading from the featured book, as well as kind of present the process and all that good stuff. And then I get to ask him questions and you get to ask him questions. So feel free at any point during the presentation to put your questions in the chat, and we will definitely access them and present them to Mr. Sullivan. And I'm sure he will happily would love to be kept busy by us. And I know I have a lot of questions, but I welcome everybody joining in. Throughout his career, Andrew Sullivan has been known for staking out bold positions on social and political issues. A fiercely independent conservative, in 1989, he wrote the first national cover story in favor of marriage equality, and then an essay, The Politics of Homosexuality. And that was in the New Republic. In 1993, an article called it was labeled as the most consequential of the decade in the gay rights movement. He's considered to be the pioneer of online journalism, having started his blog in 2000. In 2007, he was one of the first political writers to champion the presidential campaign of Barack Obama. In the past 5 years, he has proved a vocal foe to Donald Trump and the wokeness on the left. No surprise, he has fans and enemies, so to speak, on both sides of the political aisle. His book, Out on a Limb, showcases select writings from all the different articles and publications from 1989 to 2021. Please welcome to Book Passage, one of the most influential journalists, Andrew Sullivan. Welcome, Andrew.
Paula, thank you so much for that intro. I think I owe you guys, first of all, just an explanation of why this came about. And the truth is, I write essays, and that's my preferred form. And but they're all scattered across the web. They're scattered in old Dead Tree magazines. And at some point, I wanted to try and gather them all together. So that's what I did with this book, with the help of many people who helped me track them down and then sift through what was a simple mountain of material. I'm one of those writers who really has a hard time reading his own work. Once I've finished something, I want to just get it out of the way and move on to the next one. So this was kind of agonizing for me in a way. It's organized in a very simple way. It is chronological. The reason I did that is because there are several arcs in the book that go through history. And one of them is the history of the civil rights movement, the gay marriage movement particularly, alongside the extraordinary calamity of AIDS at the same time. And you can see the passage from my first arguments about marriage equality all the way through to fleshing out marriage and military service as the core ideas of the gay rights movement, through the lawsuits and the arguments and debates, through to actually the end of gay culture, and eventually now the question of whether the gay rights movement exists any longer at all. You also have an arc of history through American conservatism. As someone who began quite close and intimate with American conservatism and conservatism in general, I came from England, of course, I also chart the rise and decline and eventual degeneracy of the American right. I'm also, as you may know, a fierce critic of the social justice left, and that's clear all the way through the years. There's an early essay in the book called The He Hormone, which is a defense of the biological differences between men and women in the substance called testosterone. There's a criticism of hate crime laws in the 1990s. And then you can go through all the way to the 2010s and 2020s and find a very similar critique of some of the aspects of critical theory, is both critical gender theory, critical queer theory, critical race theory, that I've always been at issues with. I thought just to start this, I would do one reading. The reading is about the man who really inspired me and who helped me understand my own political position. He's a man called Michael Oakshott, a British conservative philosopher, whom I wrote a dissertation on. And this is the little memoir I wrote upon the occasion of his death. This was in 1991, May 6th, the New Republic. The death of Michael Oakshott was greeted in America the same way it was greeted in the English village in which he lived for the last 3 years, decades of his life. Almost no one noticed. Those among the villagers who read the obituaries in the London papers were surprised to learn that their neighbor, the sprightly, reclusive octogenarian who drove a blue MG sports car and lived in a rustic cottage on the edge of a quarry, had been regarded as one of the most original political philosophers of the century. Josiah Lee Auspitz, in a forthcoming article in the American Scholar, tells how the pastor at the sparse Anglican funeral even got Oakshott's first name wrong as the coffin tipped into the earth. The villagers knew who he was, of course. The shopkeepers recognized his face. Others knew that his wife was a painter. His neighbors had seen a variety of odd characters troop in and out of the old man's cottage over the years. They just didn't know what he did. And they had no idea what he meant. Michael Oakshott wrote only 2 books in his life. The first, published in 1933, was an ambitious, intense attempt to describe all of experience, no less, in the philosophical idiom of Hegel and F.H. Bradley. He called it Experience and Its Modes, finding in experience different modes of seeing the world: science, history, practical life, and in a later afterthought, poetry. All of experience, he argued, could be found somewhere in these worlds, if you looked hard and carefully enough. His second book, On Human Conduct, published in 1975, was an account of one mode, practical life, the world in which most of us spend our days. In it, he fleshed out a philosophy of law and of politics. Between these 2 tomes, Oakshott taught. He ran the politics department of the London School of Economics for many years and wrote a batch of essays and reviews. His only other work, A Guide to the Classics, was not a disquisition on Roman and Greeks, but a guide to horse racing. Of his intellectual achievements, the most unchallenged is his theory of history, which ranks perhaps with Vico's in its originality and scope. Sounds dry enough, and some of it, frankly, is dry. To me, however, Oakshott meant something a little different. I first came across him in an essay I found while doing some reading on Hobbes. It's not one of his most accessible, and to tell the truth, I didn't understand a good deal of it. But there was something in the assurance of his prose that stuck somehow in my mind. The essay was in a collection of his, Rationalism in Politics. A couple of months later, I came across it again in a secondhand bookstore and took it home. I started reading. Within 4 years of that discovery, I tracked down and read everything Oakshott had published and spent a year doing little else but trying to puzzle him out. It was about as painless a way of writing a doctorate as I could have imagined. And toward the end of my labors, I got to meet the man himself. I wrote to ask him whether he would be willing to discuss his work. Mine was only the third dissertation ever written about him. And he wrote back in his elegant calligraphy that he'd be glad to. So I found my way to his village, Langton-Matravers, by train from London, and arrived in mid-morning in the cloying November mist of southern England. He was waiting at the garden gate with a mischievous grin on his face and hustled me inside. The cottage was made entirely of slate and had no central heating. I discovered only 3 rooms, a cramped kitchen to one side, a poky guest room, and a living room turned into a makeshift duplex with a ladder leading to the second story, which this 89-year-old clambered up each day to get to bed. The walls were lined with books in various languages, from Victorian potboiler novels to Hegel's phenomenology. He made me coffee and a meticulous 4-course lunch, and in front of a coal fire, we talked. My trouble with Oakshott had always been with his restraint. He started his intellectual life with a grand attempt to perceive the truth about the world, and over the decades has slowly shifted into an elegant digression about the world's texture. His last essay was actually a work of allegorical fiction, as if the struggle to perceive the truth had proved too demanding to continue, even pointless. I raised the issue. Did he share the philosophical lassitude of so many of his contemporaries? He replied by saying that giving up the search for, quote unquote, the truth was not equivalent to believing it did not exist. Everything is true, he averred, so long as it is not taken to be anything more than it is. The nuances were everything, perhaps more thoroughly within our reach, the only way ultimately to understand the whole. As in philosophy, religion, Oakshott's first essays concerned religious faith, religious truth. But since the 1930s, there had been an utter silence. Faith, one could glean from between the lines of his writing, was too acute, even too crushing an obligation to sustain, or too important, too mysterious to write about. He seemed even to enjoy the ambiguity of half-belief, seeing sin as the occasion of a fascinating conversation with oneself and with God, rather than as an oppressive encumbrance to happiness. After all, he quipped half seriously, who would want to be saved? God might even prefer us as we are. We're more interesting flawed, and without flaws, no real love is possible anyway, either between us or between us and God. Love, Oakshott explained, has its origins in mutual amusement and ends in total acceptance of the other person. Or as he put it in one of his essays, quote, friends are not concerned with what can be made of one another, but only with the enjoyment of one another. And the condition of enjoyment is a ready acceptance of what is and the absence of any desire to change or improve your friend. This radical acceptance is what he put at the heart of his idea of the conservative temperament. And it's why so many modern conservatives find him so awkward a figure. This disposition is alien to them. It is fickle, aloof, humane, where they are consistent, engaged, and rationalist. Oakshott couldn't care less about politics as such, who wins and loses, what is now vulgarly called the battle of ideas. He cared about understanding the relations between human beings, and he saw the vagaries of human beings as occasions for celebration rather than correction. His paradigm was dramatic, not programmatic. His life was poetic, not prosaic. his conservative politics were not a means to repress man's exuberance, but a way to allow it to flourish when politics ends. In this, he was out of his time, but also curiously at home in it. A wildflower planted among our wheat. So that was the guy who inspired me and the conservatism that I've tried to uphold ever since. The book is full of many other subjects. It's full of AIDS, it's full of plagues, it's full of appreciation of Princess Diana and Monica Lewinsky, an essay about the brilliance of Pope Francis, an essay about the struggles of being gay and Catholic, a denigration and an attack upon the use of torture in the war on terror, the very first endorsement of Obama as the next president, and a key essay that helped get him elected. It's set in, as I said, chronologically, because the idea is to show that no individual person knows everything, that we live through time and history, and that when you look at the first things I'm writing, you know that I didn't know what was coming. And you can see whether I lived up to the moment or not. But the point is that we can't know anything for sure, that we constantly adjust and understand and try to see the world as it is rather than as we want it to be. So I'd be super happy to take any questions from anybody about any of the essays in the book or the book itself.
And with that, I'm back on. Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm glad you selected that one to read. My first question is, because you talk about being conservative, and it sounds like you still affiliate with that side of politics. And I'm just curious, don't you see yourself maybe now more as what Americans would say moderate, because you do kind of... I am a conservative because I believe in the conservative political philosophy I've always believed in. I wrote a book called The Conservative Soul, which was an attempt to explain that. But that must mean I am not a Republican anymore and never have been. It must mean I reject Trump and all his works. It must mean also that I recognize that neoconservatism, with its attempt to transform Iraq or Afghanistan, as we're now seeing, was foolish beyond measure. And in the book, I strongly supported the Iraq War. It's the biggest mistake of my career. Now, I didn't include in the book an essay supporting the Iraq War because I no longer believe it and I don't want it to be out there. Mm-hmm. What I did do is include an essay that said what I got wrong about the Iraq War, which is an attempt to be accountable to my readers for errors that I've made. I also put out an ebook where I collected every single thing I had written about Iraq and called I Was Wrong, in order to just tell people, although I had screwed up massively, I was prepared to examine why I had, to take lessons from it, and to ask their forgiveness in continuing to read me. And why would they if I'd screwed up that badly? But I think when you're honest about your fallibility and you are able to change your mind, I've been very lucky to have readers who followed me through that and put up with me and hung in with me for 30 years. That's why the book actually is dedicated to my readers. Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, you're from England or the UK, so maybe your perspective on political conservatism, being a moderate and Republican Democrat, might be kind of meshed in with all that too. It's not...
Well, to give you an example, I defend Obama as a pretty good conservative president. I mean, I think of him as a Rockefeller Republican from the 70s. He was not a radical. He tried to save the capitalist system. He desperately tried to shore it up when it was collapsing, if you remember, in 2008, 2009. He tried to govern from the center. He tried to persuade people to have universal health care, but through the private sector, an idea that was first created by the Heritage Foundation, a right-wing think tank. temperamentally, I think he was a wasp. I mean, I think in some ways Obama is the coolest cat, and had a very even temper, calmness about him that I really respect as a conservative temperament. Isn't going to go and do something completely wild and crazy or off the cuff. And no actual conservative, and I'm talking about the tradition of Burke onwards. And to some extent, right now, even in Britain, the Conservative Party has adjusted to the new currents of populism, but has not become a completely insane cult, like so much of the Republican Party has become, and is still a party of defending the Constitution and tradition in a way that the Republican Party has completely betrayed, as you could see on January the 6th of this year. So to be that kind of conservative over the years has meant that I supported, for example, Bill Clinton, but also Bob Dole, because I thought after one term, Bill Clinton was clearly unfit to be president. I supported Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush for one term. I supported George W. Bush in 2000. That was the last time I voted for a Republican. But I'm open to it because I think American society and American politics requires two parties to work. The problem right now is one of the parties has become almost impossible to cooperate, found it impossible to cooperate with our constitutional system as it is. And I'm just hoping and praying that at some point there will be some moderation in that. And it may come a little later than we want it to, but I hope it comes.
Yeah, I mean, I think your take on Obama, I think actually there are a lot of progressive Democrats that would absolutely agree with you on that he was more conservative. I probably
was saying it at the time. I was saying it at the time and beforehand, where they were still hoping he'd be something else. But yes, I do. I think they've come around to see it my way on him. Of course, I regard it as a virtue of his, and they don't. But
that's what I was going to say. They would say that, but not because they like that,
right.
that aspect of the progressives.
Right.
How does it compare being a high-profile, outspoken journalist when you kind of first were getting going and throughout the 90s, early 2000s, versus now where there's so much social media that plays into journalism, and as well as wokeness and cancel culture? How is that for a journalist? I mean, and you've been through before, after...
And during, I've been canceled by the right, and when I broke with Bush over the war, and especially over torture, which I could never forgive the American government for implementing. Then I've been canceled by the left only last year when I refused to, what I thought was not criticize. I wanted to write a column criticizing riots and destruction in the cities as counterproductive and wrong. And if you remember, the atmosphere of last summer was such that no one could say a word of restraint or of qualification. And so they got rid of me there. Happily, I've had my Substack now, which is called The Weekly Dish, which you can subscribe to, which has, we're not just about reaching 100,000 people every week. So it's now a really big platform to be able to get my ideas out there. But I think I've never actually worked as a writer in a more stressful time than it is today. You need to be able, if you're a writer, it seems to me, to be able to just say what you believe. You need to be say that clearly and consistently, and if you're wrong, correct it, but always be straightforward. Now the pressure from social media, and especially also from some of the major institutions of the academy, publishing, all the rest of it, have created an atmosphere so tense that if you use the wrong word, you are deemed irredeemable. Your writing and your ideas are deemed not right or wrong, but are you morally good or evil? And so writers are terrified of making mistakes. And they're afraid to speak their minds. And I think that's a terrible place for democracy to be in. We need to have everyone's thoughts on the table. Some of them may be nuts. Some of them may be worth disagreeing with. Some of them may be worth criticizing in full. Some of them may be worth rejecting. But unless we have them on the table, we're going to narrow the options that we have to address the problems in front of us. And so the whole point of a liberal democracy is to expand the legitimacy of people's voices. And social media does that in some ways. I think it's enabled people who previously hadn't had much of a platform to reach it. And some of that is really good. I think some of it in empowering people who are not necessarily traditionally part of the sort of literary elite. I'm talking about people of color, women, people who have been historically not as prevalent in the conversation. They absolutely should be. But we shouldn't be terrified of someone saying something that's wrong. We should be able to allow a real diversity of opinion as well as a diversity of experience. And those things help all. There are strengths as a democracy. And I think I've had so many people, younger writers, get in touch with me and say, I don't think I have a future in this because I know I can't toe that party line. I just don't really believe it. Or I have this problem with it or that problem with it. And my view is write the problem you have with it. Get it out there. Let's have the ideas flourish. I've always believed my job as a magazine editor back in the day was to provide a maximum variety of arguments as long as they were good. The first thing I did was double the letters to the editor page because I wanted the readership also to have more of a say and have more of a debate in that context. I grew up a debater. I loved debating. I do not take it personally. I think you should be able to have really robust discussions with people and go out and have a beer with them afterwards and be humans as well as political partisans. And that's what I've always tried to do. I don't like my friendships being interrupted by politics, and I don't like making friendships because of politics. I like, as Oakshott said in that little passage, I want to accept my friends for all that they are, including their flaws, including their differences from me. And that's what a liberal society is about. That's what toleration is about. It's not accepting people on the condition that they agree with you on this particular topic. It is giving them the space to believe something different than you and being secure enough to listen to it.
Yeah, no, all good points. And I could see where that would definitely change just the pressure of social media, or if the journalist allows that to be pressure.
Or the editors do.
Them. Or the editor, yeah.
They're scared of these nobodies. Like they mistake Twitter for real life. Yeah. Twitter is not real life. It's a tiny percentage of people are on Twitter. And of those, it's an even tinier percent that make up all the noise. It's important that editors, book editors, magazine editors, anyone, not listen to that. Trust their own judgment. If there are serious criticisms, by all means, hear that, take it into account, respond. But don't be bullied. There's a mentality, a mob mentality that is about bullying writers of all people. A free society should not be bullying its writers. We should be encouraging them. And people with unpopular views need to be actually the people we need to be most in favor of defending their right to say what they want to say. And it worries me that the publishing industry is now so concerned that someone's going to upset somebody that they're not actually giving writers the platform they need to really express themselves.
Well, I do want to start getting into, I still have other questions, but we do have some audience questions. And I have this first one from September Williams, and she's speaking to specific articles or an article you wrote. And she asks, given your contributions to promoting thought and action by stimulation of intelligence, in what ways has your personal thinking about race and intelligence evolved since your first reading of the book, The Bell Curve, Intelligence and Class Structure in American Life? That was one of your most controversial takes on something. And I don't want to put words.
I'm very happy to address that. Again, the principle is, do we allow debate of difficult topics? Now, if an argument is made in good faith and has reason behind it, then I believe in open debate. What I did all those years ago, which the New York Times recently talked about, was host a symposium, which included an extract from the book and then 13 separate criticisms of it in the same issue of the magazine. So I aired it, and I thought it was worth airing. Now, is it the question itself? Is that are there differences in IQ levels? That is something that we don't know the answer to at this point. We may at some point know it. And I think in the book also I have this essay that addresses this head on. Is your job as a journalist to seek the truth whatever, if you're doing it in good faith, even though it's going to enrage and upset and wound? Is it your responsibility as a journalist to do something that will harm and hurt the feelings of people you care about? And I wrote an essay called Dear Ta-Nehisi, which is addressed to my former colleague, Ta-Nehisi Coates at Atlantic, explaining that I felt I did have a duty to explore difficult topics, but I thought maybe morally it was impermissible for me at the same time. And as a Christian, if I had hurt his feelings or wounded his sense of self, it grieved me, and I asked forgiveness. But I hope we can separate, as I did before, the human and the political, the intellectual and the moral. We should be able to debate subjects freely and take each other to be in good faith. We should also take care not to harm or hurt people so far as we can avoid it. But sometimes it's the point of a journalist, of all people, to be the turd in the punch bowl and the skunk at the party. It is partly our job to make people uncomfortable, to make ourselves uncomfortable, and to ask questions that others might not ask, and debate topics that others will not debate. To give you another example, I'm a gay man, and my second book, Love Undetectable, I have a third of the book devoted to understanding the psychoanalytical view that Freud had, and some of his followers had, that homosexuality is caused by an overbearing mother and an absent father. It's an old canard, and it's an old myth. But instead of condemning these people as bigots, I went through the arguments one by one and tried to explore them. I didn't think it should be out of bounds to talk about that, even though many people thought it would wound a lot of gay people if I did. I didn't want to legitimize the kind of psychoanalytic views that created conversion therapy, but I wanted to understand what they were saying, and I wanted to, so far as I could, rebut it reasonably. And I think I could rebut most of it, not all of it. Because generally speaking, even in the worst things, there is some element of truth. And trying to find that and sift that is what our reason is for. So at some level, a journalist has an obligation not to harm, but he or she also has an obligation to the truth. And sometimes those things are in conflict, and sometimes you just have to ask people to forgive you.
Well, as a huge admirer of Ta-Nehisi Coates, I'm curious, could you speak more to the issue that you two were in disagreement about? Was it specifically what you said about the bell curve or critical race theory?
Yeah, we were having a conversation, and the essay in the book is taken from a series of pieces we wrote to one another in public.
Right.
Looking about the difficulty of debating really difficult topics, including race and intelligence. And that was how we fleshed it out. Talked in good faith together, explained where we're coming from reasonably. And in that particular piece, I'm saying, look, sometimes I think this is worth debating. You may not. I respect your point of view. Mm-hmm. But I think it was fascinating. I'm not that interested in talking about it or writing about it anymore. But insofar as I aired that topic, I am not apologizing for that. But I am sorry if I hurt you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and that seems like an interesting way to kind of, as journalists and writers, to actually explore an issue, explore both their perspectives, and kind of debate it.
The intellectual challenge is to have our reason manage to somehow not be overtaken by our emotions. And those emotions can go very deep. Mm-hmm. And that's a challenge always. But if you were not to pursue some of those difficult topics, human beings would not advance. We wouldn't figure out new things. Sometimes we have to go to places that are not always that comfortable. We're not that comfortable going to. And avoiding these topics completely can sometimes seed them to very irresponsible people who develop a reputation for somehow being cool because they're dealing with stuff which isn't properly then refuted or engaged. That's the problem. I'm interested in airing stuff and not censoring it.
Speaking of that, I see someone, Anne Spivak asked, did Ta-Nehisi accept your apology? Did asking these difficult questions impact your friendship for the long term?
I don't know. We both left the Atlantic, and so we weren't colleagues for a while. But you should ask him that. We did it in civility and in public, and you can go and actually read it. It's right there. You can go back to the Atlantic archives and read a perfectly civil and respectful debate between two people capable of operating as two fellow intellectuals without letting our hurt or our feelings get completely in the way. I'd like to think we could still do that.
Yeah, and there was an article, I believe it was like article or essay, I'm sorry. Why do Democrats feel sorry for Hillary Clinton? I love that title, by the way. And I agree with you on your take about the Clinton loss that, there was definitely enough room there for her camp and Democrats in general to kind of see what they did wrong in it that led to the election, unfortunately, of Donald Trump. But what you see, and could you talk a little bit more about that, how you were willing to come out and say, wait a sec, obviously there are a lot of negative things going on here politically, but let's take stock of everything.
Well, my view was that Donald Trump was, and there's an essay in here, which is all about tyranny and how democracy can, according to the ancient philosophers, degenerate into tyranny. It was a cover story of the New York Magazine a few years ago. Back in early 2016, where I predicted he would win, predicted that we should not be, this was at a time when people were scoffing at the idea, and also made the argument that some of the issues he was raising, the issue of mass immigration into the United States, or the extraordinary collapse of our industrial heartland under the WTO with China and free trade, these things had knocked a lot of white working class Americans' lives for six, and the elites were not listening. And that's a problem, again, not raising these difficult issues like immigration or trade or China because we don't want to create outrage of some kind, means that they bubble up and someone will exploit them unless you tackle them. And that was what Donald Trump was able to do. And he met one of the worst politicians in contemporary American history, Hillary Clinton, who ran a terrible campaign and represented everything almost perfectly that Donald Trump was campaigning against. And so lost an election to this extraordinarily malign force. And happily, thank God, after 4 years, we were delivered from it, but only just. Why? Because the Democrats are not listening to a lot of people in this country. Or worse, they're demonizing them, pretending they're deplorable, or calling them white supremacists, or not understanding that they have a perspective that's worth taking into account. And you do not do that, you're not really being a real engager in democratic politics. And if you're not careful, becoming merely tribal. And that's another theme in the book. Towards the end, I wrote this essay about how tribalism on both sides is effectively making it impossible for this republic to continue to function. And that at some point, if that keeps going, there will be a figure to emerge to say, I will fix it, and will have enough popular support to have a democratic and authoritarian regime. And part of my goal here is both to tell Republicans, a Trump cult is the antithesis of everything you're supposed to believe in, but also say to Democrats, if you keep ignoring these very difficult issues that ordinary people are tackling and dealing with, you deserve to lose. And you very nearly did. And in many cases, I fear that they will next year too, quite handily, if they're unable to correct course.
But also, do you feel at all that on the Republican side that they're actually not listening? I mean, were you as surprised after January 6th as most of us were that the Republicans didn't take that as an opportunity to disassociate themselves from Trump and actually put in place a different type of, or go back to a different type of conservatism?
They had a fantastic opportunity, and they blew it. Dangerously. Dangerous for our republic overall. And now they're casting a narrative backwards. We saw it. We were all had warned that this kind of thing might have happened. And there are a handful of Republicans who have stood up. Liz Cheney, for example, Adam Kinzinger, people who have done the right thing. Cults are very difficult to unwind, you know. I mean, people, you challenge them, they dig in and dig in and dig in. And normally what happens is the cult leader has to be so discredited or so disqualified or blow himself up or have them all do some terrible death cult thing, which frankly, at this point, given the refusal to take vaccines, is not far off. I have a horrible feeling that the only way that the Republicans are going to get past Trump and onto a saner kind of conservatism is either if Trump refuses to run next time because he's scared of losing, or he runs again and loses badly. Sometimes political parties just need to lose elections to learn lessons. I honestly can't predict the future because everything is so volatile at this point. So who knows? And I certainly think Biden is a lot more vulnerable than people seem to think. And I think his vice president is a real liability for him in terms of his ability to sense that if he were to disappear, there would be a huge problem. Kamala Harris would be deeply polarizing for the country and terribly damaging to the Democratic brand.
In what way?
Well, she doesn't have good political skills. She's really not that capable of reaching out and connecting to people. She hasn't really demonstrated much skill in government. Her unfavorables are now very high for someone this young. She's been deputed to take care of the border, which is an absolute chaos right now. And there's a reason she barely won a primary. She's a terrible politician, just as Hillary was. And people will tell you, oh, no, you're just being a misogynist. That's what they always say if you point out that someone is a woman who's a bad politician, but she is. And if something were to happen to Biden, he's the sole Democrat capable of not polarizing this country even further. And even so, he's having a very hard time. Take him out. And I think the culture war just takes off with an absolute vengeance. And I don't think she's a good standard bearer in that knuckle fight.
Well, I think there would be a lot of challenges and controversies just because she is a woman and she is Black. So you're going to get people on the other side that are, whether they're willing to admit it, they do have a problem with those things.
Or they may have a problem with her politics and her policies and her general demeanor. And so did Democrats who didn't want her for the nominee. In fact, she flailed out very early on. That's my concern. And they said the same thing about Hillary. I was told endlessly when I said she can't win. I was told that I was a misogynist, a woman hater, all the rest of it. I was right. And I'm trying to be realistic about these things.
I appreciate that. We have a question from Jenny. If you were to hang out on a remote Greek isle to talk long into the nights about the future of our world, who would be the 3 to 5 people alive you would most want to bring with you?
Oh my goodness, that's a tough one. Well, I would bring Barack Obama because I think he's had the experience now and has a little distance. To stir things up at that dinner party, I would also invite Pat Buchanan to represent the absolute alternative. I'm talking about a fun group of people who can have a diverse number. It's not people I always agree with, people I want to listen to. I would bring Ta-Nehisi to give another perspective. I would love to bring Germaine Greer, one of my favorite ornery and fascinating feminists. And maybe one of the Pet Shop Boys, my favorite pop group, both of whom are very interesting and fun people. I'm all for the mix, and who knows what they could. Did I mention Pope Francis? Because I love Pope Francis too.
No, you didn't, but we can
put Pope Francis in there.
Your party's getting bigger and bigger.
Pope Francis and Pat Buchanan would get along like a house on fire. At least Pope Francis could forgive him ultimately for all his many sins.
That's great. I have a question from May. This is once again speaking to a specific article, and I think it's the same essay of why do Democrats feel sorry for Hillary Clinton? But she's asking about, and I'm going to she put in a quote here, Asian Americans like Jews are indeed a problem for the social justice brigade. Afterwards, many on social media have commented that you were promoting racial tropes with that about Asian Americans as model minorities. And I was just wondering, did you notice the kind of the backlash? Did it bother you? Did you address it? Can you learn, from them?
Look, the one thing we know, I don't know specifically what specifically you're referring to here, but the one thing we do know is that Asian Americans are a fantastic success story in America. And we're not allowed to say that anymore. Why are we not allowed to say that anymore? If you look, for example, right now at any chart of ethnicities in America, Asian Americans are almost always at the top. Look at rates of vaccination right now. Look at rates of children being brought in two-parent families. Look at their scores to getting into colleges, and look at the incomes that are now much higher. Now, you have to disaggregate a little bit what Asian American means, because there are many, many different types of Asian Americans, and some of them have different experiences in the United States. But in general, if a group that had previously been excluded from America came to America and succeeded this well, this soon, we would be thrilled. So why? Why does the left absolutely hate it when you point out this success? And the answer is because they suspect it means that it implies that others aren't doing as well because they aren't trying as hard. Well, I didn't say that. I'm just saying, look how well they're doing. And I certainly don't think that when Asian Americans do really well, they bring up their kids extremely well on the whole. We're talking about generalities. There's a variety here, but in general, much more stable families, which is incredibly important for success in America. And when they score high on their entrance exams, and when they do well in applying to colleges and high schools, and then the government turns around and discriminates against them because they're Asian American, and there are too many of them in the school, I think it's absolutely preposterous. What the University of California just did is absolutely criminal. Their own body, their own staffing body that they organized, a committee to study whether the SAT was worth keeping, especially since it helped poor first-generation immigrants and poor Black kids more than any other measure. They turned down their own studies conclusion for political reasons. And so I have absolutely no apologies for celebrating success of immigrant groups in this society. And I think rather than condemning them or trying to say they haven't succeeded or yelling at people who have this model minority myth, maybe we should look and see what they're doing right. Maybe we should look at the fact they commit less crimes than any other group in our society. Maybe we should look at where their kids do better than almost any other group in society and ask ourselves, what can we learn? What can the rest of us learn from this? Because they're certainly outstripping white people in terms, they're now the richest ethnic group in America.
Well, I think you, in that, you actually have figured out the title for your next book.
What would that be?
No Apologies.
Well, no, I would have given, I apologize in the book for my mistake about Iraq.
That is true. That's true.
I do apologize. If I get something wrong, I'm not going to apologize for defending my values or be bullied out of it.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned earlier that you were interested to maybe read another short piece that you did pertaining to Obama. Did you? If
you want, do you want me to do that, or do you want me to take more questions? It's up to you.
I'm trying to look at the questions. I think we have time for another short.
Reading?
Is it a short essay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't we finish with this one? This is called Obama Trimmer. It says, and this is really, well, I don't, maybe I'm being too repetitive here with this one. And maybe there's a, why don't I do the one where I first meet Obama? Because I think that's in some ways more interesting, because I don't want to repeat myself about Obama being a conservative. Let me just find this for you. Here we go, 253. This was May 24th, 2007. It's called The Reagan of the Left. I went to see Obama last night. He had a fundraiser at H2O, a yuppie disco restaurant in Southwest DC. I was curious about how he is in person. I'm still absorbing the many impressions I got. But one thing stays in my head. This guy is a liberal. Make no mistake about that. He may, in fact, be the most effective liberal advocate I've heard in my lifetime. As a conservative, I think he could be absolutely lethal to what's left of the tradition of individualism, self-reliance, and small government that I find myself quixotically attached to. And as a simple observer, I really don't see what's stopping him from becoming the next president. The overwhelming first impression that you get from the exhausted but vibrant stump speech, the diverse nature of the crowd, the swell of the various applause lines, is that this is the candidate for real change. He has what Reagan had in 1980 and Clinton had in 1992, the wind at his back. Sometimes elections really do come down to a simple choice, change or more of the same. Look at the polls and forget ideology for a moment. What do Americans really want right now? Change. Who best offers them the chance to turn the page cleanly on an era most want to forget? It isn't Clinton, God help us. Edwards is so 2004. McCain is a throwback. Romney makes plastic look real. Rudy does offer something new for Republicans, the abortion-friendly cross-dressing Jack Bauer. But no one captures the sheer pent-up desire for a new start more effectively than Obama. From the content and structure of Obama's pitch to the base, it's also clear to me that whatever illusions I had about his small c conservatism, he's a big government liberal, with, for a liberal, the most attractive persona and best developed arguments since FDR. Two further impressions. At a couple of points in his speech, he used the phrase, "This is not who we are." I was struck by the power of those words. He was reasserting that America is much more than George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, and Gitmo and Abu Ghraib, and Katrina, and fear and obstinacy, and isolation. And so he makes an argument for change in the language of restoration. The temperamental conservatives in America hear a form of patriotism, and the ideological liberals hear a note of radicalism. It's a powerful, unifying theme, and he'd be smart to deepen and broaden it. My favorite moment was a very simple one. He referred to the anniversary of the March on Selma, how he went and how he came back. And someone, I don't remember who now, said to him, that was a great celebration of African-American history. To which Obama replied, no, 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 no. That was not a great celebration of African-American history. That was a celebration of American history. Yes, there's a reason for his wide appeal. The overwhelming question for me at this point in this historic campaign is a simple one. Who will stop him? And that was written almost 2 years before he became president.
Oh, wow.
There's also a piece in here that predicts that Biden will be 2 years before that Biden should be the nominee to take on Trump. So there's some stuff. There was a prediction that Trump would win the election. So I actually have a decent record of noticing things that might happen and promise that's in front of me. And Obama was such and is such a singularly, I don't know, he's just one above and beyond most other people in his generation. I'm a little, I don't know about you, but I'm a little disappointed in him recently. The fact that he nixed David Axelrod to invite some R&B star, I just like, come on, that's not you. What have you become, some big celebrity suck up and you've forgotten all the people who actually worked for you and made you president? That really disappointed me, to be honest with you. But I still love the man and still think a lot of what he tried to do and what he actually accomplished.
Well, yeah, and I definitely appreciate your essays on him and your early predictions. And I wish we could go on and on. I mean, this is a very full book of essays, but I just want to remind our audience that we do have plenty of copies at Book Passage and encourage you to either come in person safely, San Francisco or Corte Madera store, or feel free to call us or order online. But here's the book. So you see the cover, Out on a Limb by Andrew Sullivan. And Andrew, thank you so much for giving us kind of a look into how you've been thinking and how you got to where you are. We really appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate people engaging in good faith, whatever you read in this book, you're going to hate some of it and love some of it. And I'm just curious as to which ones are which. But the whole point is, you don't have to think anything, you just have to enjoy it. And I hope learn and figure something out from it about America and the last 30 years of our life here.
Yes. Well, thank you for your contribution to journalism and to being a part of the Book Passage community tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.